A cross-border crime, the missing student found in a car trunk. Hi everyone. Today, we're diving into a case that shook the international student community and raised serious questions about justice, borders, and what it means to find closure. This is the story of Shao Tong, a 19-year-old student from China, who had been pursuing her education in the United States when she became the victim of a tragic and deeply unsettling crime. The investigation, which unfolded in multiple stages, eventually led police to the identity of the main suspect. But by then, it was too late. The suspect had already left the U.S. and returned to China. That moment presented U.S. authorities with a serious legal challenge. There was no extradition treaty between China and the United States. So even though they had a suspect, they had no legal pathway to bring him back to face trial on American soil. And so began an international manhunt, stretching across thousands of miles and countless jurisdictions. The case quickly captured international attention, not only because of the crime itself, but because it highlighted complex legal questions about jurisdiction, cross-border prosecution, and cooperation between very different legal systems. At the center of it all were over 300,000 Chinese students currently studying in the U.S., many of whom suddenly felt shaken and vulnerable. This was no longer just one young woman's story. It became a cautionary tale, a call for reform, reminder that justice doesn't always follow borders. So what really happened? How far did the authorities go to find the truth? And what became of the man accused of taking a young life far from home? Let's take a closer look. Let's rewind the clock to 2014 and take a closer look at a case that would soon capture headlines and stir conversations across borders. The story begins in Iowa, a quiet Midwestern state sometimes referred to as the state of the Mississippi. Bordered by the Mississippi River to the east and the Missouri River to the west, Iowa is the only U.S. state with natural river boundaries on both sides. It's known for its low crime rate and is often ranked among the safest states in America. It's also home to Iowa State University, a prestigious research institution known not just for its academics, but also for its place in history. The school helped develop the world's first electronic digital computer, the ABC, and it's here, on this peaceful campus, where our story begins. Shao Tong, a bright, 19-year-old international student from China, had received a scholarship to attend Iowa State University back in 2012, leaving behind her hometown. She arrived in the U.S. full of hope and ambition. Despite the unfamiliar culture and language, Shao adjusted quickly. Her friendly and optimistic nature helped her form close bonds with her roommates and classmates. She was doing well academically too, even though her major, chemical engineering, wasn't her passion. She managed to maintain an impressive GPA above 375. So when someone like her, bright, responsible, and connected, suddenly disappeared, it sent shockwaves through the international student community. What followed was a global effort to uncover the truth behind her vanishing, a heartbreaking mystery that was only just beginning to unfold. September 5, 2014, a Friday like any other. At that point, Shao Tong had been studying in the United States for 3 years. That evening, she went out on a weekend trip with her boyfriend, just like many other students might. But after that night, something changed. Shao Tong stopped responding to messages, and no one heard from her again. 2 days later, on Monday, September 7th, her absence raised immediate concerns. Shao was known for being responsible and hardworking, so when she didn't show up to class without notice and then missed the entire day, it didn't go unnoticed. Her roommate grew increasingly worried. Shao wasn't responding to texts or calls, and there was no sign of her at their shared apartment. Then, just as the concern began to build, a strange message arrived, according to the text. Shao Tong was still in Iowa City, but had lost her phone. The message came from a new number belonging to her boyfriend, Li Xian. It claimed that Li had flown back to China for a family emergency, and Shao was planning to travel to Minnesota by car to visit friends. The message ended by saying she would be back in about a week. At first, this seemed to calm some nerves. It offered a temporary explanation. But soon, More red flags started to appear. After that one message, no one heard from Shao again. She didn't reach out to her friends, and she completely stopped posting on social media, something that was very unlike her. Her usual online presence had suddenly gone dark. Her roommate tried contacting friends in Minnesota, hoping someone had heard from her, but no one had. No one had seen her. No one knew where she was. By September 17th, more than 10 days after, she vanished. Shao's roommate could no longer wait. She went to the local police department and filed an official report. Investigators immediately understood the gravity of the situation and launched a full-scale missing persons investigation. Their first step was to check bus terminals for any records that Shao might have traveled toward Minnesota, but there was no CCTV footage of her boarding a bus. They then searched the apartment she shared, but found no clues or signs that would help locate her. The last confirmed sighting of Shao Tong was at a small roadside hotel called the Park It Inn, located at 1521 South Avenue in Nevada, Iowa. The hotel manager told investigators that he remembered Shao and her boyfriend Li Xiang Nan. They had stayed there several times before. According to the manager, the couple checked into room 218 at 4:30 p.m. on September 5th. He recalled seeing Shao walking down the hallway on the evening of the 6th. The couple had planned to check out at 11 a.m. on September 7th, but by the time morning arrived, both they and their car were gone. They had left the hotel without checking out, taken all their belongings, and disappeared without a word. That afternoon, the hotel manager entered the room and confirmed that everything had been cleared out. Unfortunately, the hotel's surveillance cameras had malfunctioned, leaving investigators with no footage of the couple arriving or leaving. However, nearby security cameras told part of the story. Just before checking into the hotel, Shao and Li had stopped by a convenience store not far from the property, where they were captured on video purchasing snacks and bottled water. As the investigation continued, authorities noticed something odd. There were no signs that Shao Tong had been followed, threatened, or involved in any kind of conflict. Her social life seemed simple and calm, with no indication that she had any enemies or troubling relationships. That left one unsettling possibility. Could her disappearance be linked to someone close to her? Someone like her boyfriend, Li Xiang Nan? One of the first red flags was that Li never reported her missing. Despite being the last person known to have seen her, he made no effort to alert police or help with the search, adding to the concern. Shao's roommate mentioned to investigators that she had always had an uneasy feeling about Li. While she couldn't explain it fully, something about him just didn't sit right. Eventually, investigators confirmed what they had feared. Li Xiangnan was the last person to see Shao Tong before she vanished. With that, the case took a more serious turn, and authorities officially opened an investigation into him. Li was born in September 1991 in Shanghai, China, and later moved with his family to Zhejiang province. His upbringing was comfortable. His parents were supportive, loving, and placed high hopes on his future. They invested heavily in his education, and by most accounts, Li was academically capable. To help him pursue better opportunities, his family decided to send him to study abroad in the United States. The only challenge? His English skills were weak, so he enrolled in a TOEFL preparation program at a test prep center in Beijing, and it was there that he met Shao Tong. Shao was born in 1994 in Dalian, a port city in northeast China. She was an only child, raised in a loving household. Her father worked in the public sector, and her mother stayed home to care for the family. From a young age, Shao had been bright and academically gifted, especially in mathematics. Her dream was to become a biologist, and throughout high school, she competed in numerous math competitions, earning strong results. Early on, Shao had pinned her hopes on excelling in Olympiad-level math contests, hoping it would allow her to enter college through direct admission, without needing to take the standard university entrance exams. But that dream didn't pan out the way she hoped. Shao didn't perform well enough to qualify, while Li Xiangnan, her then-boyfriend, did exceptionally well and received a scholarship to study abroad. The contrast in their outcomes was difficult for Shao, but instead of giving up, she chose something bold. She would study in the U.S., too, on her own terms. Her parents, though not wealthy, supported her unconditionally. They believed in her dreams so much that they put forward their entire savings to help her go. In July 2011, Shao enrolled in an English program in Beijing, hoping to improve her language skills before applying to universities. And in an unexpected twist, she ran into Li Xiangnan again, the same boy she'd known before. Li was instantly drawn to her. Shao was intelligent, poised, and full of quiet determination. When he learned that she also planned to study in the U.S., he became determined to win her over. And perhaps because the thought of having someone familiar in a foreign country was comforting, Shao slowly opened up to him as well. Their relationship grew naturally from there, and before long, they became a couple, Trong empty lane via them na. At one point, Li Xiangnan even met Shao Tong's parents. Though they didn't initially warm up to him, they didn't intervene in the relationship either. Having a familiar face by their daughter's side in a foreign country seemed like something worth appreciating. In 2012, the couple officially left for the United States to begin their studies. But they didn't end up at the same school. Shao Tong enrolled at Iowa State University, while Li Xiangnan was accepted into the Rochester Institute of Technology, located over 1,000 kilometers away, a distance that would take at least 15 hours to drive during their first 6 months in the U.S. Li occasionally made the long trip to visit Shao, but over time, the cost and effort of maintaining that kind of distance proved too difficult. By May 2013, Li made a significant decision. He transferred to Iowa State University, where Shao was studying. Instead of living in separate campus housing, Li insisted on moving into the same off-campus apartment Shao shared with her roommates. It didn't take long for problems to arise. Li was messy. He rarely cleaned up after himself. His presence began to strain the atmosphere in the shared space. Several of Shao's roommates eventually asked him to leave, but he chose to stay. The general impression among Shao's friends, they didn't like him, and it wasn't just about hygiene. Many of her classmates shared a similar sentiment. Despite being a couple, Shao and Li didn't seem emotionally close. Shao was sociable, confident, and well-liked, and it didn't go unnoticed that other male students were interested in her. She had close friendships with a few of them, and that seemed to bother Li. Maybe that tension was part of why they decided to take a short trip together on September 5th. Li came from a wealthier family and owned a BMW. Shao, who was doing an internship at the time, had recently bought a 1997 Toyota Camry to help her get around more easily, even though Li had his own car. Whenever they went out together, they usually took Shao's Toyota, but something else happened just before that weekend. On September 3rd, just 2 days before the trip, Li called Shao on the phone. Shao didn't recognize the caller at first, and while speaking with friends, she vented about how frustrated she was with Li's behavior. What she didn't know was that Li had overheard the entire 30-minute conversation, and it did not sit well with him. He grew angrier than anyone expected, and even posted a harsh message on social media that hinted at his growing frustration. Despite the tension simmering beneath the surface, the two still went on that weekend trip together, and that would be the last time anyone saw Shao Tong. When police began making arrangements to bring Li Xiangnan in for questioning, he had already vanished. After further investigation, authorities discovered that Li Xiangnan had left the United States on September 8. He had asked a relative to help book him a one-way ticket. Since there were no direct flights from Iowa to China, he first flew to Chicago and then quickly transferred to a flight bound for Beijing. It was clear he wanted to get out of the country as quickly as possible. September 16th was Li Xiangnan's birthday, but when friends messaged him to wish him well, they received no reply. That silence raised suspicions. Meanwhile, when it came to Shao Tong, police could not find any CCTV footage of her boarding buses or appearing at airports. There was no indication that she had left the country. This only deepened fears that something serious had happened to her. The more investigators looked into Li's actions, the more troubling the picture became. His sudden and unexplained departure right after Shao Tong's disappearance clearly suggested he was fleeing from something he couldn't face. Although the U.S. authorities couldn't arrest him once he had returned to China, they pressed forward with the investigation. They conducted a thorough search of both his apartment and his car, hoping to find any useful clues. But the results were disappointing. There were no obvious signs of what had happened. What they did find, however, was telling. His apartment was in complete disarray. It looked like he had left in a hurry, without bothering to clean up anything. And while there were no solid leads at that point, police weren't ready to give up on Shao Tong. But she and her Toyota had seemingly vanished into thin air without leaving behind a single clue. As news of her disappearance spread across Iowa State University, Shao's close friends and other students began sharing her story across social media in hopes of locating her. Sadly, none of their efforts produced any breakthroughs. Then, on September 26, 20 days after Shao Tong had last been seen, a resident of Iowa City contacted the police. They reported a strange, unpleasant odor coming from a parking lot near Building 44 of the Dolphin Lake apartment complex. Officers arrived at the scene and quickly located the source: a Toyota vehicle with the license plate 287 GDZ. It was Shao Tong's car, and it had apparently been parked there for several weeks. Inside the car, investigators found Shao's damaged cell phone on the driver's seat. In the back seat, they uncovered several printed documents, including flight booking information connected to Li Xiangnan. But what truly shocked them was what they found in the trunk. There, inside a large suitcase, was the source of the odor. The discovery was grim: the remains of a young woman, in a state that indicated she had been there for some time, while the investigators had already feared the worst. Opening the suitcase still stunned them. Forensic testing confirmed it was Shao Tong. The cause of death was ruled as a combination of restricted breathing and head trauma. There were also signs of injuries to her mouth, and a blood-stained towel wrapped around her head matching the type found earlier at the hotel where she and Li had stayed. Next to her, police also recovered a 68-kilogram weight, believed to be connected to the incident. At this point, what began as a missing person case had officially turned into a homicide investigation. Li Xiangnan's sudden return to China created a major obstacle for U.S. authorities, since there was no extradition treaty between the U.S. and China. Even if you were found, he couldn't be sent back to the U.S. for prosecution. During their investigation, police discovered that Li's actions before and after Shao's disappearance pointed to premeditation. On September 5th, the day they went on their trip and checked into the hotel at 4:30 p.m., Li had already asked his cousin to book him a one-way flight back to China, well before anyone realized Shao was missing. Then, on September 6th, while Shao returned briefly to campus for school-related errands, Li drove to two stores where he bought a large suitcase and two weighted items. He later placed all of it into the trunk of Shao's car. Security footage from both stores showed Li carefully comparing suitcase sizes, even kneeling on the floor as if trying to measure whether one could fit something sizable. Eventually, he chose a large black suitcase. By the afternoon of September 7th, Shao had returned to the hotel. After that, no one ever saw her again. Investigators believe the critical time frame was between the night of September 7th and the early morning hours of September 8th. The only physical evidence left behind was found in room 218 of the hotel. Upon reinspection, officers discovered a small trace of blood near the bed. Forensics confirmed it belonged to Shao Tong. Beyond the physical evidence, additional insight came from Shao's WeChat account and a testimony from one of Li's friends. On the morning of September 9th, Shao's father had a brief text conversation with her via WeChat. But when he asked for a video call, the request was denied. This left him feeling uneasy. Looking back, he realized that it may not have been his daughter replying, but someone else using her phone to maintain the illusion that she was still alive. One of Li's acquaintances also revealed something troubling. Li had once asked how long it would take for police to officially consider someone missing. This suggested prior planning. Cell phone tracking later placed Li near a river around 4 a.m. on September 8th. Authorities believed he may have initially planned to dispose of evidence there, but likely abandoned the idea due to shallow water. Ultimately, combining Shao's injuries with the cause of death, investigators concluded that she had been harmed but was still alive, and that her death was the result of restricted breathing while being confined in a small space. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was calculated, deliberate, and deeply malicious. Every detail pointed to a well-planned scheme orchestrated by Li Xiangnan. At the time, nearly 300,000 Chinese students were studying in the U.S., and the news of Shao Tong's death sent shockwaves through the entire international student community. Her passing was met with immense grief and public sorrow. A memorial was held right on the campus of Iowa State University. Professors, classmates, and students from other states gathered to light candles and lay fresh flowers in remembrance of a bright young woman known for her kindness and ever-present smile. Back in China, the story spread rapidly. The revelation that Li Xiangnan had returned home immediately after Shao's disappearance stirred outrage across the country. On Chinese social platforms like Weibo, more than 150,000 comments were posted within just 2 days. Views on related content surged into the millions, and the public began dissecting every detail of the case. Anger only intensified when Li's parents announced that they had not seen or heard from their son since the case went public. They claimed he never came home. What followed was an incredibly complex legal and diplomatic situation. The case required intense cooperation between U.S. and Chinese authorities who not only operated under different legal systems but also lacked a formal extradition treaty. Without direct evidence in China, and with Li out of U.S. jurisdiction, prosecuting him across borders seemed nearly impossible. As public pressure mounted, Li Xiangnan remained nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Shao Tong's parents were consumed by grief and exhaustion. They publicly pleaded for greater collaboration between the two governments, urging both nations to prioritize justice over bureaucracy at the time. No similar precedent existed between China and the U.S., but other countries like Canada and New Zealand had previously tried citizens for crimes committed abroad as early as 2002. Eventually, progress came. After Iowa police completed their investigation in March 2015, Li Xiangnan was officially charged with murder, and an international warrant was issued. Even before international media fully caught up, Chinese authorities reached out to their American counterparts to coordinate next steps. In April 2015, a Chinese investigative team traveled to Iowa to work alongside U.S. officials, reviewing evidence and strengthening the case. Then, on May 13, 2015, more than 8 months after the crime, Li Xiangnan voluntarily surrendered to police in Guangzhou, China. The trial took place in March 2016 at the Guangzhou Intermediate People's Court. Investigators from Iowa were also present, providing testimony based on the original U.S. investigation. During the trial, Li Xiangnan admitted to causing Shao Tong's death. However, he claimed it wasn't premeditated. Instead, he described the incident as an emotional outburst, an accident that occurred during an argument that spiraled out of control. He insisted that he had always loved Shao deeply, and that her death was the unintended result of a heated moment, not something he ever meant to happen. He argued that he never intended to harm her, let alone cause her death. His family offered 2 million yuan, approximately $300,000, in compensation to Shao Tong's family, hoping the court would adopt what they described as a balanced and compassionate view. When asked why he booked a flight back to China so quickly after Shao Tong's death, Li claimed that he had been in a poor mental and physical state and simply wanted to return home to rest. He explained that the suitcase he purchased was meant for packing up his apartment, and the weights were supposedly for working out, but investigators didn't buy it. Several details in his explanation raised red flags. Li never informed his family in advance that he would be returning to China. The so-called move was merely a relocation to another apartment within the same complex. The weights he bought weren't a matching pair. They were different sizes, most notably. The store where he purchased the suitcase and weights was over 2 hours away from his residence, which didn't make sense for routine errands. Furthermore, medical evidence showed that Shao Tong had sustained significant injuries to her head and face and had lost 2 teeth. Li claimed he had only grabbed her during an argument, but this statement did not align with the forensic findings. All signs pointed to premeditation. He had asked a friend how long it typically took for someone to be reported missing. He had purchased large items that could be misused. He used Shao Tong's phone to impersonate her after the incident. And then, he fled the country. Given the weight of the evidence, the court found Li Xiangnan guilty of intentional homicide. He was sentenced to life in prison, with permanent revocation of his political rights. After the sentencing, Li filed an appeal. However, the court rejected it after carefully reviewing the case, including the physical and digital evidence submitted by U.S. authorities. The judge ruled that the audio, visual, and testimonial evidence provided by U.S. authorities was credible and admissible in court. These materials were considered sufficient to establish the facts of the crime. As a result, the original verdict was upheld. However, the court did take into account 2 major factors. First, that Li Xiangnan had voluntarily turned himself in. Second, that his family had provided financial compensation to the victim's family. Because of these mitigating circumstances, the court decided not to impose the death penalty. What stood out later was Li's behavior during his time in prison. After 5 years of serving his sentence, he had reportedly demonstrated remorse, shown a willingness to improve, and actively participated in prison rehabilitation programs. He had also received 6 formal commendations for good behavior. Based on these records, his request for a sentence reduction was granted. His life sentence was officially reduced to 22 years. If no further incidents occur, Li Xiangnan is expected to be released on June 27, 2042. By then, he'll be over 50 years old. And now I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this tragic and deeply unsettling story? Drop a comment below and share your perspective. And as always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another real-life mystery. Today's video ends here. Thank you all for watching until the very end. See you in the next videos. Goodbye.